Podemos? Bom, boa tarde a todos e todas. Vamos dar início ao nosso seminário, né, em homenagem ao professor Emérito Joaquim Pinto de Andrade. Eu estou aqui substituindo o João Gabriel, que teve que buscar o professor Joaquim, né, e já vou passar a palavra para o Jorge para ele coordenar as apresentações dos artigos. Lembrando que cada apresentação deve ficar em torno de 20 minutos apenas, tá? Então, siga em frente aí. E dou as boas-vindas a quem está online também. Nós temos uma tradição sempre de não só ter gente ao vivo, mas também tem muita gente assistindo a posteriori os eventos aqui, só para ficar registrado, que a gente disponibiliza no YouTube as apresentações, né? Então, bem-vindos todos e vamos iniciar o nosso evento, que vai se estender até amanhã, sábado, tanto presencialmente quanto pelo YouTube, então online. Jorge.
João.
João.
Oi, pessoal, meu nome é João Faria. Eu sou um dos organizadores desse encontro, junto com o João Gabriel Araújo e com o professor Divino, José Ângelo Divino, da Universidade Católica de Brasília. A ideia é que nessa sessão, a gente inicia a sessão, depois faz a homenagem oficial ao Joaquim e segue com a aula magna da professora Marcele Chauvet, certo? So, let's start this section. The section actually has three papers. The first paper is going to be presented by Professor Gilberto Tadeu Lima from the University of São Paulo. His paper is Capturing the Government Budget, Evolutionary Dynamics and Long-Run Economic Performance. Gilberto, please, if you keep under, let's say, 15 minutes, so we have 5 minutes for questions or doubts, and we follow afterwards, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Joca. Should I present in English or Portuguese?
English, because this is going to be put on YouTube, and of course we want to have to maximize the audience.
Okay, makes sense. Let me share my presentation here. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So let me start by congratulating the organizers for this well-deserved event to honor Professor Joaquim Andrade. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I was not a student of Joaquim, but I always enjoyed meeting him in conferences, in workshops, either at UNB or USP, and it was always a very rewarding experience for me to interact to Joaquim. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Actually, the paper I will be presenting is a different one from the one that João Faria presented. Actually, I will be presenting a paper which is related to the one that I was intending to present, but it's more specific. It's also a paper on the capture of government budget, but in a very specific sense, because now we are dealing with tax evasion. So what we have here is a paper in which we develop an evolutionary dynamics of tax evasion, and then we derive implications in terms of economic performance in the long run. So this paper is co-authored by my most frequent co-author, Jailson Jair da Silveira, who is not here, so I will redirect all the blame to him, and will collect, of course, all the benefits that you can see in the paper. So basically, what we do here is to try to model some empirical regularities regarding tax evasion. So what do we have in terms of general regularities. The first one is the persistence of tax evasion, which means that the government fiscal capacity to provide public goods, services, and social benefits is compromised. So tax evasion is persistent. In terms of estimated figures for the tax gap, which is the way that tax evasion is usually presented, for the OECD, on average, we have around 10%. In Brazil, estimates are around 15 or 20%. So tax evasion is persistent, but that is what people in the literature will call the tax compliance puzzle. The puzzle is the following. The puzzle is not why do we see so much tax evasion. Actually, the puzzle is why don't we see more tax evasion than we see in the data. And the reason for that is that if the early models addressing tax evasion, which would be basically based on some cost-benefit analysis, would predict that tax evasion would be much higher than what we see in the data. And that's why this literature was complemented or has been complemented by several behavioral insights to try to see what other elements, in addition to some cost-benefit analysis, explain why don't we see more tax evasion than what we see in the data. Another important feature of the data is there is heterogeneity in tax compliance behavior. The heterogeneity along several dimensions, gender, age, and so forth. And also, this heterogeneity is endogenously time-varying over time. So these are some of the features that we try in the model to incorporate. So basically what we do is to build a simple model in which tax evasion will arise endogenously and will persist over time as governed by some evolutionary interaction between individual behavior and some aggregate dynamics. Basically, what we have is a micro dynamic of the distribution of tax compliance strategies within the private sector and the macro dynamic of some key variables such as private capital accumulation, net government revenues, and per capita income. Here, the private agents will periodically decide whether they will comply with taxation or will try to evade taxation. But this distribution will not be parametric. This distribution of tax compliance strategies within the private sector will evolve over time as guided by some evolutionary selection protocol, which I will describe in a while. So just as a preview of the results, we have an evolutionary equilibrium. As evolutionary equilibrium outcomes, we have two monomorphic equilibria, which means that either everybody will evade taxation or nobody will evade taxation. But these two monomorphic equilibria are saddle point unstable. And then there is a unique polymorphic equilibrium, which means that there will be coexistence of tax evaders and compliant individuals, and this equilibrium will be asymptotically stable, which means that the model is able to replicate qualitatively the empirical evidence regarding the persistence of tax evasion. The model I will run through very quickly. It's very simple. It's a strictly conventional, let's say, pseudo growth model, because we don't have this is not a endogenous growth model, for instance. But here we have this distinction between tax collection from compliant taxpayers, equation 1. X is the proportion of tax evaders. So 1 minus X is the proportion of tax evaders or non or compliant taxpayers. Tau is the tax rate, and Y is the aggregate income, which is uniformly distributed across the private sector. But the government will also collect revenues from applying fines or from levying fines on tax evaders who are caught. So equation 2 will give us this variable. So C is the cost of is the auditing cost. So 1 minus C is a measure of what the government will collect in net terms. Epsilon is the probability of detection of tax evaders. Gamma is the penalty rate. X is the proportion of tax evaders, and Y is the income. So we have equation 2, which will give us the net fine revenues by the government. All the net government revenues are allocated. The government runs a balanced budget. All net revenues will be allocated in the provision of free of charge of a public service, which will be an input in the production process of the private sector. So net revenues here is a flow, is not a stock. Equation 4 will give us the net government revenues in per capita terms, which is little g. And then we have this aggregate production function, which is homogeneous of degree 1 with constant returns to scale. So aggregate output, Y, will be produced using private capital, K, G, which is this flow of public services, productive public services, and L, which is labor supply. And then we have in intensive form this production function. So per capita, then we can compute per capita income, which is equation 7. One important thing here is, as you can see, per capita income will be parameterized by X, which is the proportion of tax evaders, and also other parameters. Then we can compute equation 9, which is households' total disposable income. Households' total disposable income is comprised of two terms. The first one is this 1 minus tau, which is disposable income of compliant taxpayers. And then the second term, 1 minus rho, is disposable income of tax evaders who are caught and are therefore penalized from doing so. Then equation 9 will give us, equation 10 will give us aggregate savings. Aggregate savings is a proportion of households' total disposable income, and little x is the exogenously given saving rate. All savings are automatically redirected to private capital accumulation, which is equation 11, which is quite familiar, except for the fact that, again, this private capital accumulation dynamics is also parameterized by X, which is the proportion of tax evaders. Equation 14 is private capital accumulation in per capita terms, which can be rearranged or as in equation 15, which is, again, it's a very familiar equation of motion for private capital in per capita terms, except for the fact that there is this heterogeneous behavior in terms of tax compliance, and that's why this expression is parameterized by X, which is the proportion of tax evaders. But the proportion of tax evaders will endogenously vary over time according to some evolutionary dynamics. And the evolutionary dynamics that we use in this model is the so-called replicator dynamic, which is very common in evolutionary biology. It's very common in evolutionary games. It's very common in evolutionary theory more broadly. And the idea is very simple. A phenotype, in this case, a tax compliance strategy, will increase its share in the population if it performs better than the average, strictly better than the average. And that's why equation 22 will give us, in the left-hand side, we have the gross rate of the proportion of tax evaders. UN is the payoff associated with evading taxation. And this payoff is measured by per capita consumption associated to tax evasion. So UN is the per capita consumption of tax evaders. U bar is the average consumption, per capita consumption, across the two types of taxpayers. So the payoff here is measured by per capita consumption. So equation 22 tells us that the gross rate of the proportion of tax evaders in the population, in the private sector, will increase when the per capita consumption of tax evaders is strictly greater than the average per capita consumption, which means that in this case, this phenotype or this strategy will replicate at a higher rate than the average, which means that it will increase its share in the population. So, as you can see, we have a two-dimensional system because we have the dynamics of little k, which is the capital accumulation, the private capital accumulation, and we have the dynamics of X, which is the share of tax evaders. So it's a two-dimensional system, and what we do is to conduct the standard equilibrium analysis. Just a piece of information which is important, which is equation 21. Rho is the expected punishment. Rho is the product of the epsilon, which is the probability of a tax evader being caught, and gamma is the penalty rate. What we do is to endogenize this expected punishment by the proportion of endogenous, by the proportion of tax evaders. I will skip the details here, but the idea is simple. The government is not able to spot who the tax evaders are, but the government is able to calculate how much of the total maximum tax collection has been evaded. As the government knows how many agents are in the private sector, the government is able to know the proportion of tax evaders, but not who the tax evaders are. And that's why the government has to incur a cost, C, to audit and actually detect who the evaders are. And the more evaders, the higher the proportion of evaders, the higher the penalty rate that the government will apply on them. So as I said, we have two evolutionary equilibria, x equal to 0, which means no
Roberto,
agent. Yes.
you have
Just
5 minutes.
Okay, that's enough. I will see. So we have two monomorphic evolutionary equilibria, which are x equal to 0, which means no private agent evades taxation or try to evade taxation, because as you realize it, evasion may be unsuccessful because he or she may get caught. So x equal to 0 is an equilibrium. X equal to 1, everybody will evade taxation, is also an equilibrium, but these two equilibria are saddle point unstable. And then we are able to show that there is an interior solution or a polymorphic evolutionary equilibrium in which in the private sector will coexist both tax evaders and tax complying agents. And this unique polymorphic evolutionary equilibrium will be asymptotically stable, which replicates, as I said, the empirical evidence or regularity regarding the persistence of tax evasion. One comparative statistics of interest is that the higher the tax rate, tau, the higher the proportion of tax evaders. Now, we are still working on the analytical solutions, but just to give you a flavor of the results, let me present some simulation results, some simulated effects of a change in the tax rate. Recall that we have this positive relationship between the tax rate and the proportion or share of tax evaders. In this first figure, we have Y star, which is the per capita income, K, little k star, which is per capita capital in the polymorphic equilibrium, and G star, which is the net government revenues in the polymorphic equilibrium. And then we vary the tax rate. As you can see, take the green curve. The green curve is actually an augmented Laffer curve. Why is it augmented? Because we endogenize the proportion of tax evaders, but it is still an inverted U-shaped curve as in the original Laffer curve. So as the tax rate rises, the net tax collections, now with an endogenous share of tax evaders, rise, and after a maximum, a higher tax rate will actually reduce the total net tax collection from the government. The same applies, and this is shown by the yellow or orange line, for the dynamics of the capital stock in per capita terms, which is also inverted, U-shaped. In the end, what we have, and this is the blue curve, what we have in the end is a higher tax rate, first increasing per capita income and then reducing it. This is important for our purposes because if you go to the empirical evidence, regarding whether higher tax evasion will lead to higher per capita income, you will find mixed results. So there are evidence that higher tax evasion will lead to higher per capita income, but there is also empirical evidence showing the opposite. So the model is able to replicate this empirical evidence qualitatively, because as the tax rate rises, so will the proportion of tax evaders. Here, it's this three-dimensional representation just to show you C. Remember, C is the auditing cost. And as you can see, this inverted... Okay, 1 minute. This inverted U-shaped format for the response of the per capita income to a change in the tax rate is also robust to different values of the auditing cost. The same applies for the capital stock. The same applies for the net government revenue. Here, the same applies to theta. Theta is the elasticity of punishment. The same applies to the capital stock, to the government revenues. Anyway, so this is just to give you a flavor that this inverted U-shaped behavior is robust to these parametric changes. So, but this is the, let's say our most important result. Thank you so much again. And Joca, just to let me know that I have to apologize in advance, because I will be unable to stay till the very end of this presentation or this session, this whole evening. So I may have to leave earlier.
Yeah. Before you leave, I ask people if there are any questions, because I have some observations to make. Anyone? Okay, just a couple of recommendations. One thing that you might be interested in looking at is whether or not X doesn't lie on the 0, 1, but whether or not X is greater or smaller than 1/2. Because this is like most of the, as you show the figures, most of the evasion, tax evasion is around 20%. So it's probably between 0 and 1/2. So to look at these conditions would be a bit more interesting. And there is two things that you should think about, because we are talking about disequilibrium, but you impose a budget equilibrium, and you also impose an equality between savings and investment. And what would be something very interesting is if the government expenditures are greater than the collected taxes, and whether savings are greater than investment. So these are my observations. Okay, guys, now we are going to move on to the presentation of the paper by Afrânio, Thrasher, Victor Coelho, Wilfredo Sandoval, and Matthias Tesman, Optimal Allocation of Banking Assets and Shadow Prices of Bank Portfolios.
Boa tarde.
You can start.
Ok, iremos compartilhar a apresentação apenas. Ok. A pergunta que baliza o nosso trabalho, ela é simples de simples de enunciar, mas ela não é trivial a resposta. Quando, quando um banco enfrenta regras de restrição, regras regulatórias, qual que está limitando o resultado do banco? Então, iremos mostrar aqui durante o trabalho que ah, resolver esse problema com solução dual vai mostrar qual que é a regra que está limitando a aumentar o resultado do banco. Então, as limitações, as regras regulatórias, elas nunca vêm sozinhas. O banco enfrenta diversas regras regulatórias. E justamente qual que é o custo de enfrentar cada uma dessas regras regulatórias? Qual que está limitando o seu crescimento? Então, o que a gente entende e que a gente vai provar com esse trabalho é justamente tentar usar como referência regulatória que o dual vai responder qual que é essa referência, qual que está barrando o aumento da rentabilidade. Então, a contribuição do trabalho, ele motiva justamente pelo lançamento da 4966 no Brasil, que é imposta pelas regras de Basileia e internacionalmente conhecida como IFRS 9, então que é uma regra que ela passa a considerar como perda esperada e não como perda incorrida, como era a regra anterior. A segunda contribuição do trabalho é a respeito do método, né, como considerando os duais como preço sombra e mostrando qual regra regulatória que está mordendo. E o terceiro é o resultado em si, porque encontramos resultado que o provisionamento ele domina, ele tem mais peso do que o capital, em uma ordem de magnitude em torno de 1.750%. Então, já antecipando, essa é uma pesquisa operacional, é simplesmente uma aplicação de método, a gente não tem uma nova metodologia ou algo nesse sentido colocado. Então, as principais regulações e imposições que a gente está tratando nesse trabalho é justamente as regras de Basileia, consideradas aqui nos pesos relacionados a capital bancário. Estamos olhando o risco ponderado por cada ativo, tendo ativos aqui que vão desde 0% de ponderação de capital até 1.250% para algumas securitizações, sendo que o mínimo regulatório no Brasil atualmente para instituições é 10,5%. Então, considerando todos os ativos ponderados ao risco, o capital ele tem que ser 10,5% deste valor. E introduzindo a nova regra de provisionamento da 4966, considerando perdas esperadas, onde a gente tem isso em 3 estágios. Então, o estágio 1, onde ele considera a perda de 12 meses, a perda esperada de 12 meses para esses ativos. Quando o ativo passa para um estágio 2, passa a ter o lifetime aqui do ativo. E quando passa um estágio 3, a gente tem um piso regulatório aqui de 60% de provisionamento, o que acaba impactando o resultado. O primal deste problema, então todo banco ele vai tentar maximizar o seu retorno, dado o retorno individual de cada ativo, a provisão alocada àquele determinado ativo e também o seu custo. Então, aqui, esse problema de maximização está me dizendo quanto de dinheiro o banco está colocando em cada um desses ativos. Então, o retorno e a provisão, eles são individuais de cada ativo, então cada ativo é separado por rating e por estágio de classificação. Então, isso vai acabar impactando retorno e provisão. Então, ele maximiza esse resultado, essa alocação, sujeita a 6 regras aqui impostas. A primeira é capital. Ela tem que ter um um valor regulatório que ela tem que cumprir, então a sua alocação, a sua primeira restrição é capital. A segunda restrição que a gente tem, a primeira restrição é regulatória, é regulação de Basileia. A segunda é provisionamento de risco. aqui encarado como como um apetite a risco, ah, ah, onde o banco faz sua declaração de apetite a risco, aqui é o limite de risco que a instituição aceita. E aqui, então, baseado quanto ela aceita de risco, é justamente o quanto ela vai estar alocando também de resultado. A terceira restrição está relacionada ao orçamento, o tamanho do balanço do banco, então ela está limitada ao seu tamanho de ativos. A quarta restrição é relacionada à 4966, a nova restrição a respeito de provisões. A quinta restrição relacionada à concentração. Aqui a gente usou a concentração baseada em produtos, por exemplo, eu vou alocar no máximo 20% em crédito pessoal. Porém, no dia a dia da instituição, isso aqui está relacionado mais a cliente do que a produto. Então, tem um limite regulatório de exposição a cliente. E a sexta restrição é relacionada a não ter alocação negativa em nenhum dos ativos. Totalizando todo o problema, a gente vai ter em torno de 156 ativos que a gente vai tentar maximizar. E aqui já adiantando um ponto, a gente manteve o problema como um problema de programação linear justamente para a gente ter os preços sombras melhor definidos e para poder ter essa melhor identificação. Bom, o grande ganho do trabalho está aqui, a respeito dos duais. O primal, ele simplesmente vai me dizer qual que é o principal resultado que eu poderia ter, mas, porém, o dual, ele vai me dizer quanto que, se eu relaxar de cada uma daqueles restrições que a gente tiver, quanto isso iria aumentar de resultado. A gente não utilizou os duais diretamente da solução primal, a gente calculou eles explicitamente, e comparando os dois, a gente tem um gap entre eles de menor do que 10 na menos 7. Então, os resultados são robustos. Então, justamente, o dual vai me dizer quanto que eu relaxar cada uma das restrições poderá melhorar o meu resultado do banco. Para a calibração desse modelo, a gente utilizou resultados divulgados de um grande banco de varejo e também de um banco de desenvolvimento. Então, a gente vê quanto que estava alocado na sua carteira e quais eram os pisos que tinha dentro da carteira, os pisos regulatórios. Então, aqui a gente tem a grande regra da 4966, explicada aqui um pouco sobre os estágios. Então, no estágio 1, a gente vai ter a perda esperada vezes o loss given default de cada carteira, que aqui está calibrado a 45%. A segunda, a gente vai ter o lifetime da operação, e a terceira vai ter um piso regulatório que está em 60%. Calibrado isso, os retornos dos ativos são calibrados, não são de um banco real em si, eles foram calibrados pelos autores, porém os números regulatórios, tanto de provisão quanto de provisionamento de 4966 e de RWA são reais. A respeito de resultado, então, o que o primal me entrega? Dado o cenário simulado de uma instituição que estávamos com 500 milhões de valor de ativo, em torno de 95 milhões de patrimônio de referência, o modelo chegou a uma alocação ótima nesse caso, onde o retorno seria em torno de 25,9 milhões, sendo que chega no limite regulatório, aqui do índice de Basileia, em torno de 10,5%, e uma provisão aqui de 1,78%, e todos os ativos estavam em estágio 1. Então, a gente vê que ela é eficiente porque me traz, no mínimo, no piso que eu tenho aqui de Basileia, que é 10,5%, então ela usou todo o risco que ela poderia utilizar. A sua carteira é comportada, pois a inadimplência é baixa, em torno de 1,78%. E aqui a gente pode já reparar algumas nuances do resultado. A gente vê que ativos com um alto nível de provisão de capital, como é a securitização, que provisiona em torno de 1.250%, ela entrou dentro da carteira. E a gente percebe que ela não é a primeira e nem que tem outras securitizações, porque a gente vê uma securitização com rating BB com essa alocação. A alocação foi selecionada aqui justamente porque ela entrega uma provisão baixa nesse nível, um retorno dado essa provisão. Porque se a restrição fosse capital, provavelmente ela não entraria aqui. Então a gente já vê que a provisão de crédito ela é mais pesada do que uma restrição de capital, justamente porque um título de 1.250% de provisão de capital entrou no resultado, no primeiro resultado. O, o, o grande ponto e o ganho que a gente encontrou são a respeito dos resultados duais. Quando a gente olha o resultado dual, a gente vê que
5 minutos.
o provisionamento, se eu relaxar R$ 1 de provisionamento, a gente vai ter um ganho, um aumento no resultado em torno de 2,98. Então, relaxar R$ 1 em provisionamento, eu vou ter 2,98% de resultado. Enquanto o capital vai estar em torno de 1 centavo. O orçamento entrou aqui, mas o orçamento é mais não é uma restrição regulatória, é uma restrição de balanço do banco. Porém, vocês poderiam me dizer o seguinte: isso é uma questão do teto de provisão que você colocou. Poderia ter essa indicação. Aqui a gente mostra que se eu relaxar o teto de provisão no meu eixo, X aqui eu vou ter a provisão de 2 até 14 milhões, a gente vai ver que quando eu relaxar a provisão, vai em torno de 10,8 milhões que a minha provisão, meu provisionamento, ele vai ser inferior à capital. E a gente vê que tem dois eixos com escalas bem diferentes, justamente porque até esse ponto o provisionamento continua sendo muito superior e muito mais restritivo do que o capital. Então, muitas vezes, quando a instituição está olhando simplesmente para a restrição de capital, ela está olhando justamente para a restrição errada. O resultado 3 que a gente encontra aqui é justamente essa escala que a gente tem, que a gente aumentou. Qual que é esse limite? A gente vê que isso não é fixo, isso vai depender muito do apetite de risco de cada instituição. Então, dependendo do apetite de risco, o seu impacto de capital vai mudar, mas a gente vai conseguir saber isso claramente olhando a trajetória do dual que a gente apresentou no gráfico anterior. E olhando a respeito dos estágios da 4966, a gente acabou fazendo alguns testes de sensibilidade, mudando o piso dele de 10 até 50%, o resultado acabou não mudando. Então, a gente viu que a regra imposta pela 4966 de provisionamento, ela, por si só, ela já é suficiente para medir o risco da instituição, e a própria instituição, por buscar eficiência e buscar maximizar o seu retorno, não alocaria nos outros estágios de composição. Então, por si só, a primeira parte da regra já é suficiente. Então, para discussão e para juntar os três resultados, né? Então, a gente viu que o provisionamento é mais restritivo que o capital. A regra que domina isso não é fixa, ela vai depender do apetite a risco da instituição, e que o provisionamento por estágios por si só já é suficiente. E aí alguns pontos de limitação, né? O modelo é determinístico, ele foi calibrado com os dados que a gente simulou, justamente baseado em modelos reais. Ele pode ser simulado com modelo real, e porém a gente apresenta que a trajetória dele aqui tem a sensibilidade, até o que a gente mostrou no gráfico, ela se comporta e pode ser replicada. Então, como conclusão, né, fizemos o primeiro trabalho que a gente vê falando sobre essas restrições e alocação da 4966 e da resolução de Basileia. Viu que o preço sombra, no caso, ele domina a capital, com em torno de 1.750% na ordem de magnitude. Encontramos o resultado, maximizando o resultado dessa instituição com uma carteira controlada, viu o regime de transição e também chegou na dualidade forte do instrumento. Então, a gente consegue entregar regulatório aqui, o próprio regulador pode olhar esse modelo e replicar para chegar nos seus pontos de calibração e ver se o capital está impactando ou não, restringindo ou não o resultado bancário. Bom,
Muito,
era isso.
muito obrigado pela apresentação. Existem alguém gostaria de fazer uma pergunta? Eu tenho duas perguntas para fazer. A primeira é a seguinte: você fez uma distinção entre bancos públicos e privados?
Aqui nesse modelo, não, João. Aqui nesse modelo, a gente pegou um banco específico. A gente não fez. Quando a gente vai fazer a alocação, a gente vai na
Ah,
unidade. Vai
na
pegar a
unidade.
carteira daquele banco específico, a gente vai olhar aquele banco específico.
Pois é,
Então,
mas se você fizesse para um banco, vamos supor, um banco estadual, um banco estatal versus um banco privado aí no Brasil, o que você esperaria encontrar de diferenças?
apetite a risco diferente. Apetite a risco diferente, e isso a gente vai conseguir ver justamente no. Porque o dual, quando o seu apetite a risco, ele provavelmente ele vai ser mais punitivo. Você tem mais apetite a risco, o dual ali de base de provisionamento ele vai ser menor do que do banco que ele tem um apetite a risco maior. E isso a gente vê na prática. Então, bancos mais agressivos, bancos de trading, que a gente costuma visualizar, provavelmente o apetite a risco dele vai ser maior e o capital, quem sabe, possa ser mais restritivo do que provisionamento. O problema é o tamanho da magnitude. A gente viu ali que por mais que até o nível que o capital zera, desculpa, o provisionamento zera, ele vai ser sempre superior porque a magnitude dos dois é muito diferente.
Uma segunda, isso é mais uma sugestão. Acho que um banco de muita importância, que seria muito interessante você fazer esse exercício, seria o BNDES.
Uhum,
Se
com
é
certeza.
possível fazer alguma coisa relativa com o BNDES.
É possível sim, João. Esse modelo é totalmente replicável. Dado que a instituição vai ter todos os seus dados de rentabilidade por produto, provisionamento por produto que seu modelo já está sendo imposto, as regras regulatórias que são iguais para todo mundo, a gente consegue dizer qual ativo seria melhor alocar para chegar a essa composição. Ela é importante porque quando a gente ouve 10,5 é o valor que você tem que ter de Basileia, não pode ser abaixo disso. Então, sempre que a gente ouvia isso, a gente sempre pensava o seguinte: bom, então é só eu trabalhar 10,5 que eu vou estar sendo eficiente. Isso não é totalmente verdade, a gente viu aqui. Porque eu posso estar trabalhando a 10,5 e a restrição que está me prejudicando não ser capital. A restrição que está me prejudicando pode ser justamente a provisão de crédito.
Perfeito. Obrigado. Obrigado pelo esclarecimento. O João Gabriel já está de volta aí, pessoal? Ai, ai, ai. Ai, eu não, deixa eu apresentar aqui a vocês o organizador, que é o José Ângelo Divino, grande amigo da Universidade Católica. Então, os organizadores desse encontro somos eu, João Gabriel, o Zé Ângelo. Ah, Agora a gente vai esperar aí a chegada do João, né? Enquanto isso, por favor, tire um break aí, tome um café e a gente espera quando ele
Mas qual a
chegar.
perspectiva do chegada do João Gabriel?
Ó, ele foi pegar o Joaquim. Aí você sabe como o Joaquim é enrolado, né?
Bom, juntaram dois, né? Juntaram dois, né, João?
É, então vamos ver
Pediu
aí
a
se.
terceira pessoa para ir buscar os dois, não?
Eu podia pedir um Uber, né? Era mais eficiente, mas os caras não têm
Não,
uma. Os caras não
alguém
têm.
pediu um Uber para eles, né? Alguém pediu um Uber para eles.
Exatamente.
Não eles
Exatamente.
pediram.
É aquele negócio, os caras não podem dar o braço a torcer ao empresário, aos empreendedores, né? Tem que ser.
Bom, mas ninguém tem o contato do João Gabriel para perguntar se ele está a caminho, só para a gente não ficar no vácuo completo aqui, né?
É, eu não sei, eu não sei se eu não sei se eu poderia apresentar meu paper agora para preencher esse vácuo. Se vocês.
Daniel tá ligando para ele, mas acho que poderia apresentar, né? Porque
Então eu vou tentar apresentar meu paper. Obviamente, eu não preparei, ia preparar, mas eu tenho os slides. Deixa eu ver se eu consigo meus slides aqui. É, só um momento, por favor.
você conseguiu ligar para ele? Daniel, caminho, não disse quanto tempo. Tá chegando?
Tá chegando?
Diz que já está subindo, então
Ah,
dá.
beleza, beleza.
Ah, não,
Me
então
salvou.
aguardamos.
João Ricardo,
Mas só
agora
aproveitar seu comentário, viu, Joca?
Ah,
Um
ah,
desdobramento um desdobramento que a gente está trabalhando é exatamente para ter uma situação de orçamento não equilibrado e aí
ah.
conectar a questão da evasão com o endividamento público, né? Com a
Beleza.
sustentabilidade do endividamento.
Isso é muito
Entendeu?
importante. E uma outra coisa que você pode fazer é fazer por estados, né? Porque eu garanto para você que no Maranhão a evasão deve ser bem maior
Sim,
que em São Paulo, né?
sim, sim. Não,
Então,
tem várias extensões possíveis.
é,
Como sempre, tem várias extensões e vários follow-ups
é,
possíveis, né?
beleza. Mas é muito interessante a sua proposta. Achei muito legal. O Jailson tava por aí, mas ele não apareceu
O
uma vez.
Jailson, ele tá, ele tá apagando um incêndio de um outro artigo nosso que a gente tem um deadline para segunda-feira.
Ah, ok.
Então ele só veio se certificar de que eu não falaria nada, digamos que o comprometesse, e aí falou: não, vou voltar para o outro artigo, porque o nosso deadline é segunda-feira.
Beleza.
Mas ele estava aí, sim.
É, vou fazer um café para mim.
Nós só vamos passar porque a gente fechou um convênio agora para um clube de convênio do CORECON-DF, então já fica divulgado para que vocês possam acessar também, tá? Todos os economistas têm direito, tá? Tá boa.
O tempo passa, né?
Cara de homem sério. Você tá danada.
Algum tempo.
Hã?
Algum tempo.
Queria saber se... Mas quem mais está lá? Tá todo mundo lá.
Marcele,
Oi?
você ainda está associado ao FED?
Não.
Só. Você falou com o Chicão?
Eu?
É,
Não.
se eu botava.
Então,
Faz muito tempo que eu não o vejo. Muito tempo.
mas quem está mandando agora?
Bom, esse pessoal mais antigo vai trabalhar na xadrez, Chico geral, Pipom, do IPA. Tem o revolutor também do IPA, Oswaldo e uma galera nova que a gente contratou recentemente. Isso.
O cara da UNB também, daquela mesma época que estava na Católica, por vocês.
O Giovanni.
Oi?
Giovanni, você pode apresentar o seu paper hoje?
Depois vai ter. Meu senado, já tinha marcado com o Gabriel, eu tinha marcado para amanhã.
Não,
Tudo
sem
bom,
problema.
Joca?
Tudo ótimo.
E até te agradecer pessoalmente, viu,
Não,
pelas orientações e a dica, viu, que você deu? Eu ajustei, você já chegou a
eu
ver?
vi. Eu adorei porque também é uma homenagem ao Mauro Boyanovski, né? Que o Joaquim
Foi,
gostava
sem
muito.
dúvida.
Então é uma coisa maravilhosa que você fez no paper. Gostei muito.
Tá cortando aí alguma coisa? Obrigado, viu, professor João? Foram ótimas as suas sugestões.
Obrigado. Legal.
Apresenta amanhã. Eu cheguei agora, cheguei agora em Brasília. Fui em casa ali rapidinho, deixei as coisas e vim para cá. Mas amanhã eu
Beleza.
apresento.
Beleza. Mas obrigado pela sua participação. Muito
Eu
importante.
que agradeço, obrigado. Ai, correria, bicho. Eu fui ontem à noite para São Paulo. A gente tinha uma reunião hoje de manhã lá no Sebrae São Paulo. Aí voltei à tarde, depois do almoço, peguei um voo 4h20. Daqui a pouquinho é problema.
Ué, Joca, não estava chegando aí o Joaquim? Não estavam subindo já?
Pois é. Como é que tá a situação aí, Ângelo? Alguma notícia aí sobre o Joaquim?
Falaram que ele estava subindo a escada, né? A escada está um pouco longa.
A escada deste prédio aí ou a escada de...
Boa pergunta. Porra, já me sabe.
Jacob's Ladder.
Sexta, mas... Que correria, mano.
O Lucas tá aí também?
Bom, cara, que bom.
Oi, Gilberto, o Joca, tô aqui sim.
Ô,
Beleza.
Lucas, tudo bem aí? O Lucas foi meu monitor, Joca.
Ah, beleza.
Fui.
Você sabe, Gilberto, você sabe que eu participei da banca do Lucas. Aí eu falei com ele, ó, vou dar pau nessa sua tese aí, que é só comunismo.
Não, mas depende. Agora se explica. Quero um
Agora
comunismo
está
bem
explicado.
feito ou mal feito? Quero um
Pois é.
comunismo bem feito ou mal feito?
Não, estava bem feito, estava bem feito. Até você sabe que o Lucas é o jovem economista brasileiro com o maior número de publicações, né?
Não duvido, não duvido.
É.
Só vejo ele por aí. Só
O
não ganha
Lucas,
de você, né, Joca? Só não ganha de
o
você, né?
Lucas mas o Lucas em mais 2 anos me ultrapassa. Ele já publicou o quê, Lucas? 50 papers?
39. O Joca me deu umas dicas antes do doutorado, durante o doutorado. Ele virou uma espécie de orientador permanente,
Foi
pós-doutorado, orientador para a vida.
Bem. Que ano foi,
Mas foi a
Lucas?
melhor coisa.
Eu defendi em
Eu tinha avisado pro
2023.
Gabriel, porque eu disse, olha, eu não sei se eu não consigo chegar na sexta-feira à tarde.
Não, mas eu
Tá em
digo.
São Paulo, no
Foi
meio
meu
Eu fui
monitor em
seu monitor em
2002, não foi?
2022.
E foi exatamente isso.
2022.
Ainda bem que deu certo essa troca.
4 anos agora,
você-
né? Que a gente entrou em contato, né?
Deu certo.
O Mauro falou: aqui, vai lá conversar com esse João Faria. Cuidado que conversar com ele tem que ser meio delicado.
É. Mas eu e o Lucas, aí eu apresentei o Lucas ao Emilson, com quem ele vai. O Emilson, a Marcele conhece, estudou era contemporâneo da Marcele na UNB. O Emilson está trabalhando com o Lucas na área de energia. E amanhã
Tá.
eles vão apresentar um paper deles, que é um dos papers da Research Agenda deles. Então, é um negócio
Bacana,
interessante.
bacana. E você tá lá na UFOP ainda, Lucas?
Deu as
Isso,
inscrições.
Giba, eu estou na UFOP e ano que vem eu vou fazer um pós-doc lá em Auckland, com o Emilson, lá na Nova Zelândia.
Ah, bacana.
Eu,
Bacana.
eu tentei trazê-lo aqui para a Flórida, mas ele falou que não quer trabalhar, não, ele quer vida mansa. Então, aqui, quando o cara vem aqui me visitar, tem que cortar a grama, né? Aí,
O
pô,
Emilson me falou que tem que ficar na churrasqueira, tem que trabalhar.
trabalhar, cara, fazer
Tirar
churrasco,
neve, tirar neve do.
Limpar a piscina, você vai achando que vai
limpar a
descansar? Não,
piscina.
vai trabalhar.
Vocês viram quem chegou aqui? A professora Lurdinha e a professora Adriana Marta. Elas não estão aparecendo na tela, tem que aparecer aí.
Lodinha, tudo bem? Lodinha Joca falando aqui.
Provoquei, agora sim. Pode falar aqui no microfone.
Tudo bom? Como é que você está?
Tranquilo? Como é que você está? Tranquilo?
Bem. Com você,
Beijão.
hein?
Hã?
Por favor, comigo sempre. Que bom. E aí, moço? Muito bom lhe ver.
Marcelo,
Lucas, você vai estar lá no encontro lá de Diamantina ou não?
Gilberto, não vou estar. Esse ano eu não vou conseguir. Não, PEC, eu vou estar. Foz do Iguaçu.
Tá. Esse encontro de Diamantina é um dos mais, talvez o mais interessante do Brasil, viu?
O que é? Sobre o que é esse encontro?
Ele começou como encontro de economia mineira,
É bom, eu já
mas
fui
aí ele
vários.
foi ganhando
É,
uma escala bem maior.
Ah,
Mas quer dizer, a cidade é super agradável, tem toda uma programação social que é
legal.
bem feita, padrão mineiro de qualidade, né? Padrão mineiro de organização de eventos, né, Lucas?
muito grande.
Torresminho com cerveja gelada, né?
Tem também, tem.
Vesperata,
Ô, Gilberto, você vai?
Uma formação.
lá para Diamantina vou.
Vai,
A
né?
PEC
É
ainda
de
não
dois
sei,
em
não.
dois anos, eu acho que tem.
É, de 2 em 2 anos.
é só professor de... E eles fazem pesquisa e publicam.
Aí, Joca, tá vendo?
Mas eles subiram na escada lá do Jacó.
Do prédio do Joaquim, do prédio do Joaquim, viu? Você já teria acabado de apresentar, Joca.
É, exatamente.
E é acadêmico.
Aí, agora caiu o Corecon.
Caiu.
Ó, aí a gente pode conversar, então. Não, já está voltando, né? Tá?
Tá voltando.
Já tinha apresentado, já tinha acabado há muito
O,
tempo.
o Giba, você tem visitado a Notre Dame?
Ah, não, já tem muito tempo que eu não vou, viu?
É?
Bastante.
Ainda existe aquela luta lá intestina lá, 2 departamentos, como é que é?
Não, a coisa se resolveu com a. Eles foram desidratando o outro departamento, aí, num dado momento, terminaram aquele departamento, espalharam os
Ah,
professores daquele departamento entre outros departamentos e mantiveram só o outro, né?
tá.
E aí
Interessante.
começaram a investir só no outro, né?
Ah, é. Você.
Joca, mas qual que é a
Oi?
programação agora? Agora teria
Não,
aula
agora.
magna,
Não, agora o
é
que
o
vai.
terceiro.
O que vai acontecer agora é o seguinte: vamos esperar o Joaquim chegar para a gente fazer uma homenagem para ele,
É,
e aí depois a Marcele dá a aula magna. E eu falei, Marcele, me desculpa aí pelo atraso, mas a gente tem coisas que a gente não consegue controlar, né?
é. Quanto mais de longe, né? Mas aí essa sessão de homenagens vai poder falar mal do Joaquim, então?
Sim, quem quiser falar, contar uma anedota, alguma coisa assim, tranquilo. Tá aberto para todo mundo. A gente, a gente acho que vai abrir com um vídeo que a gente recebeu do Leonardo Burstein, tá? Que ele não pôde vir para Brasília, então é um vídeo de 2 minutos. E depois a gente abre a palavra, por exemplo, se você quiser
Não, eu
lá,
gostaria de falar umas palavras, viu, João? Em homenagem ao Joaquim, que eu acho que ele merece.
excelente, excelente, sem dúvida.
Contar um caos que o deixe constrangido.
Ele não liga para nada, cara. É muito tranquilo.
Chegou.
Chegou?
Chegou agora.
Beleza.
Vou falar com ele, não.
Paper já foi apresentado? Ah, tá. Meu? Hã? João, quer pra eu apresentar ainda?
Não, cara, deixa esse seu paper para apresentar amanhã.
Tá bom, deixa pra amanhã. Aqui
Tá?
peguei trânsito.
Ah,
Difícil de achar um estacionário para descer pro...
tinha que mandar um Uber pegá-lo, cara.
Mas o duro é que veio bastante gente. Eu fui buscar a família, né? Buscar ele, a filha, a neta,
Todo
Dona
mundo.
Maria Helena. Fui buscar todo mundo aí. Mas eu apresento amanhã, vai rapidinho.
Ah, tranquilo.
Deixa eu chamar ele.
O Giba, o Mauro também está participando. Amanhã ele vai apresentar o paper dele. É o paper com. Deixa eu ver quem é o autor dele.
O Mauro Rodrigues?
O Mauro Rodrigues,
Eu
ele vai
não
apresentar.
lembro de tê-lo visto na programação,
Eu
não.
também não, Joca. Eu não vi o nome dele, não.
Putz, meu Deus do céu. Tá, eu vou falar com o João, meu Deus do céu. Ele botou, tirou, botou, tirou. Oh, my God.
E o Jorge também está envolvido, Joca, ou não?
Jorge Abaix?
Não, Jorge Thompson.
O Thompson vai apresentar amanhã. Thompson tá tranquilo. Ele estava em Brasília até semana passada, pô. Aí voltou para Washington.
Ah,
Uma pena.
Aquele cara de barba branca. Ele vai rapaz, sempre. Professor. Posso ver a palavra?
Quer sentar aqui?
Se sentir frio, você avisa pra ele, tá?
É, Joca, eu vi aqui o nome do Mauro não tá mesmo, não.
Pois é.
não.
Eu vou depois dessa aqui, eu vou ligar, eu vou falar com o João. E também falar com o Mauro.
Eu com o Mauro, é importante falar com o Mauro.
É
E amanhã
evidente.
tem que dar um toque no Mauro também, de novo.
Impressionante, cara.
Acontece.
Pô,
Mas
não,
o
é porque
livro vai sair, Joca.
sim, o livro vai sair. O livro vai sair. A gente vai tentar primeiro sair pela ah,
Routledge.
não, não, o Springer Vela.
Spring.
Porque a Springer já me mandou vários convites para mandar para organizar livro. Aí eu aceitei. Vamos ver agora se a proposta eles aceitam. Porque
Bacana.
Oi, João, por favor, inicie os trabalhos, João.
Fica melhor falar assim ou... É?
É, é,
Inglês,
tá
né,
ótimo.
Joca?
Inglês. Não,
Inglês.
não, não, faz de acordo com o Joaquim. O que o Joaquim prefere?
Ele vai fazer inglês.
Então, estou aqui, vou enrolar um pouco.
Tá certo.
Estou
Let's do it in English.
Ok.
esperando o óculos. Vamos chegar.
Pode começar? Ok.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming and for in the virtual meeting too. It's a pleasure to be here with Professor Joaquim Andrade. I would like to extend my thank you to the CORECON and also COFECON, the institution are responsible for the organization here, and also for having us in this meeting room. It is a pleasure to be here to organize this conference, this workshop with Professor João Ricardo Faria and also with Professor José Ângelo Divino. We have been working for, I don't know, 3 months for to this meeting in honor to the Emeritus Professor Joaquim Andrade. And I'm really grateful for this because I'm currently under his supervision here at the University of Brasilia. We have been working on some TFP programs and also the TFP impact on the Brazilian economy. And I met Professor Joaquim in 2019, and he don't remember about this because I was too afraid to go close to him and say hi in 2019 to the Unpack conference in the Getúlio Vargas Foundation in São Paulo. It was really strange because everyone says to me that he is a dangerous person, he is angry, he is everything he is not. And I was too afraid to talk to him and even to say hi. It was quite a surprise to be there with him and not talking to him. But after that, in 2023, 2022, actually, he was my professor in a course na macroeconomic, na advanced macroeconomic theory, where he was teaching Margin's book, Raising Cane's 21st Century. And at that time, I was an Uber driver, and I had to write a paper inside of the car, and it was quite an experience because he is a very rigid professor. And fortunately, I finished my paper, and he introduced me to Stephen Margling. And since then, I had a lot of opportunity to write papers with him and to meet his family, which became my family too here in Brasilia. They are great to me. They invited me to a lot of parties and coffees. Sometimes I I go to their house without asking anything. So, but it's quite nice. I would like to thank Professor Joaquim. It's a pleasure, an honor, and for me, you are more than a professor. You are one of my closest friends, and I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really honored to organize this meeting with Joca and Professor Divino. So I will extend my talk to them. I will pass the floor to Professor Joca and then to Professor Divino to speak a little bit about their experience with you. So
Well,
the floor is yours, Professor Joca or Professor Divino.
all right. This is let me go pretty fast. This is well-deserved fast scripts. We are going to try to publish all the papers in a book format, and of course, a fast script for Joaquim as an emeritus professor is to celebrate all his accomplishments, and I think that among them, the most important is the number of students that learn economics because of him. So this is one thing. The second thing that I want to say is the following. I did all the macroeconomics graduate classes at UNB with Joaquim. And Joaquim, at the time, every time I would submit a paper to unpack, and Joaquim would reject it immediately. And, but it's very curious because one day he woke up from his dogmatic dream and finally realized that I could be a good asset. So we wrote one paper, and this was my first ever publication. It is about 32 years ago. So I am very grateful to Joaquim. And later we collaborated in a number of other projects as well. After I'm going to pass the word to José Ângelo, but also Gilberto wants to say some words, and anyone in the audience that wants to say thank you or whatever, or to tell a joke, something like that, you are welcome. Okay, José Ângelo, please.
Well, I agree with all you have said, but in my case, Joaquim has had a great influence in my career. He was my advisor in the master here at UNB, And then we had some publications, good papers. Some of them are still being cited in the literature, especially one about monetary policy in the Bank of Japan. Joaquim was there when we wrote this paper. He was visiting a university in Japan, and we were supposed to work together, but there is a 12-hour jet lag. So Joaquim was there 8 in the morning, I was here 8 in the night. And then I just had to go home. And the other day he was very upset with me. Why you left? We should work together. But I could not work.
I was upset.
But at the end, we finished the paper and everything went well. And another thing that I'd like to say is that Joaquim was responsible for my coming to UNB. When I finished my undergrad at Viçosa, at that time it was not a well-known university, received the results by postal mail at that time, and there was no communication, no internet at all. It was late in 1890. And Joaquim called me. I had the options to go to some university because I had a good result at the UNPEC exam. And Joaquim called me, and good talk, good promises, and yeah, come to Brasilia. Brazil is very nice. Central Bank is here. We can work with them. And then I believed him and decided to come to Brasilia. And I think it was the best decision in my life because my career now is here, my family and everything came after that. So Joaquim, thank you very much. You are a great influence in my career.
Gilberto?
Jock, I think I will take the liberty to speak in Portuguese because I have something to say to Joaquim that I may not be able to manage to. Bom, super obrigado novamente. O Joaquim não estava aqui quando eu fiz a minha apresentação, Joaquim, e eu acho que isso foi de caso pensado, né? Para você chegar depois da minha apresentação, mas mesmo assim você vai ter que ouvir algumas palavras. Viu? Enfim, para mim é uma alegria enorme estar aqui. Como eu mencionei, eu não fui aluno do Joaquim, não tive o prazer de ser aluno dele. Interagi bastante com ele em várias ocasiões, seja aí na própria UNB, em eventuais visitas minhas, para participar de alguma banca, seja na USP, quando ele vinha para cá para participar de alguma coisa, né? Quando ele chegava no dia certo, né? Porque uma das passagens que eu lembro é que um belo dia eu encontro a nossa assistente acadêmica lá na USP, né? Ela estava meio desesperada, ela sabia que eu conhecia o Joaquim. Não, mas o professor Joaquim tem um concurso que está começando agora, não sei o quê, não sei o quê. Aí eu, enfim, falei, olha, entre em contato com ele deve estar a caminho, etc. Né? Aí a secretária imediatamente ligou, o Joaquim calmamente respondeu para ela, não se preocupem, amanhã estarei aí. Não, mas a banca começa hoje, né? Lembra dessa, Joaquim? Isso deve ter sido, sei lá, uns 18, 20 anos atrás. Enfim, mas é uma alegria grande para mim estar aqui. Eu tenho muita lembrança positiva dos nossos encontros lá na ANPEC, Joaquim. Sempre bem-humorado, sempre perspicaz, sempre com tiradas muito inteligentes, sempre com uma ironia fina e agradável, mas sempre com uma seriedade acadêmica tremenda, né? Tive a oportunidade de, enfim, foi difícil para mim, quer dizer, resistir quando o Joaquim insistiu comigo para que eu assumisse a editoria da revista da ANPEC, né? Que o Joaquim vinha e vem, salvo engano, até hoje, conduzindo de forma muito efetiva. Mas eu tinha acabado de sair da editoria da Estudos Econômicos depois de 5 anos, e eu falei, não, Joaquim, eu preciso de um tempo, porque é uma tarefa nada trivial, principalmente na realidade institucional que a gente vive. Então, acho que o Joaquim também deve ser congratulado, né, por essa enorme contribuição que ele dá à comunidade do ponto de vista da gestão da revista, e, sabe, não me surpreende, né? Mas eu devo confessar, Joaquim, que eu lembro até hoje de um dia que eu apanhei muito de você, viu?
Não,
Você, apanhei muito de você,
jamais.
juntamente com o nosso estimado, infelizmente falecido, né, Fernando Cardim Carvalho. Isso foi no ano, se eu não me engano, de 94 ou 95, quando, numa sessão da Ampec, né, eu e o professor Bresser apresentamos um artigo que a gente havia escrito sobre microfundamentos da macroeconomia. E aí, os dois comentadores, Joca, escalados para debater o artigo foram o Fernando Cardim e o Joaquim Andrade, que, eventualmente, se o contexto fosse outro, teriam sido mais amigáveis. Mas, à época, o Bresser era ministro da Reforma do Estado, se eu não me engano. Acho que era esse o nome, né? E, evidentemente, o serviço público brasileiro, em boa medida, né, não estava muito satisfeito com o Bresser, né? Então, tal como me confidenciou o Joaquim, o próprio Joaquim depois, né? E eles foram realmente duros com o artigo, né? Mas como me confidenciou depois o Joaquim, falou, olha, mas é que o momento era assim, o Bresser não era exatamente uma pessoa, digamos, bem vista, né, junto ao serviço público. Você deu azar de ter escrito um artigo com ele e apresentado com ele nesse momento, né? Mas, assim, tirando a dureza, controlando por esses efeitos exógenos, né, certamente foram contribuições super importantes e foi mais um episódio em que eu me lembro, né, com enorme alegria do Joaquim, né? E fico feliz de estar aqui também porque eu acho que eu estava em dívida, né, com figuras ilustres da UNB. Eu, infelizmente, não tive condições de participar da mesma homenagem que foi prestada ao professor Joanílio, né? Infelizmente, por razões alheias completamente à minha vontade, não consegui participar. Então, falei, não, desta vez eu não posso deixar. Evidentemente, não é apenas, a minha participação não é motivada apenas por esse débito que eu acho que eu tinha, né? Porque intrinsecamente, certamente, o Joaquim também merece algo, algo desse tipo. Então, Joaquim, fico muito feliz de estar aqui, é uma alegria enorme poder participar de uma merecidíssima homenagem a alguém que eu acho que deu uma contribuição, tem dado uma contribuição em várias dimensões à academia brasileira. Em várias dimensões, eu tenho certeza que vários testemunhariam nessa mesma direção. Então, Joaquim, parabéns e contamos contigo para continuar colaborando conosco.
Obrigado.
Thank you, Gilberto. João Gabriel, can we put on the Leonardo boosting video right now?
Oh yeah. Daniel. Thank you.
É uma pena, tristeza que eu não vou poder estar aí para celebrar nosso Joaquim, mas é também um momento para eu aproveitar e refletir, né? e ver o tanto de orgulho que eu sinto de ter sido um aluno orientando e amigo do Joaquim, e a gratidão enorme que eu sinto. Desde o início, eu era um moleque adolescente na UNB, fui fazer a primeira matéria com o Joaquim, se não me engano, Macro 2, e depois monitorei, a gente foi meu orientador, e determinou muitas das coisas que foram acontecendo, tanto na minha carreira quanto dos meus pares. Uma lição, uma influência, uma visão que foi muito determinante ao longo dos anos, para mim foi a ideia de que se você realmente quer ser mais eficaz em desafiar o status quo de como as coisas são feitas, como a ciência econômica é feita, faça por dentro. jogue o jogo neoclássico, e questione, e desafie os supostos, as hipóteses. E isso foi uma coisa que eu levei comigo na carreira inteira, desde o início. Fui parar em economia comportamental, mas assim com essa ideia, essa semente dessa ideia de que joga o jogo, faz trabalha dentro dos modelos e começa a desafiar e criticar. Isso foi uma coisa que foi uma influência desde o início e eu sigo isso até hoje. Passo com meus orientandos, que são os netos acadêmicos do Joaquim, né? Eu sou o filho acadêmico dele. E, enfim, é com um prazer enorme, uma satisfação, uma honra, que eu digo que eu fui aluno, orientando, amigo e influenciado pelo Joaquim, todos os anos da minha carreira. Então, eu queria te mandar um abraço muito forte, Joaquim. Infelizmente, não posso estar aí para celebrar, mas estou aí em espírito e desejo tudo de bom para você e abraço a todos os amigos.
So now, do we have anyone wanting to speak about Joaquim, or can we go forward and ask Joaquim to speak?
Anyone else wants to talk?
I'll talk later, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you talk later. Yeah.
Anyone else? No? So now I will pass the floor to Professor Joaquim Andrade. Professor, this is your water, so it's better to go there. And
Well, I'm very pleased and very emotionally down by the appreciation you all gave to me, and I am really touched by your alma mater. Well, by the way, then I will read this paper, that small paper I wrote on the for this meeting, and the title of the paper is "University and the Loss of Dreams." Viu, Joca? Loss of Dreams. The University of Brasilia was my alma mater, where I developed my academic foundations and learned to appreciate the university environment, a place where we could propose and solve real-world problems, particularly in the field of economics. My education was a blend of neoclassical economics and a critical perspective that questioned traditional solutions, reflecting the left-wing intellectual climate of the time. Student movements were flourishing across universities, especially at UNB. Lecture halls were filled whenever Milton Santos spoke. John Robinson would sit in informal circles with students and faculty after her lectures. We fought for a university that was nice, that was free-thinking and committed to educating individuals capable of understanding reality and creating solutions for a free and sovereign nation. 50 years is a long time, yet my memory still preserves vivid images of those years of struggle, intellectual pursuit, reading, and engagement with both contemporary and classical economic literature. I remember the graduate students working in the basement, a space they had transformed with work tables and bookshelves filled with volumes that nourished their ideas and guided their dissertations. Hammocks were hung nearby for a brief rest after lunch, and the garden outside offered a peaceful view where, if one looked up, the sky itself became part of the experience. I vividly recall those students, their minds filled with ambitious plans, many of whom began teaching their own colleagues while still students themselves, such as Adriana Amado, Eduardo Viotti, and Bernardo Kipnis. It was an atmosphere of extraordinary enthusiasm. They were young dreamers, nurturing their aspirations and determined to make meaningful contributions to economics. We recognized their commitment and became part of their journey through reading groups, seminars, and classes taught by the students themselves. We belonged to a generation that genuinely believed we could help build a better world. We pursued utopias in which we believed, inspired by figures such as Darcy Ribeiro, Anísio Teixeira, Oscar Niemeyer, Edmar Bacha, Lauro Campos, Charles Miller, and Flávio Versiani. It is important to emphasize Edmar Bacha's role in structuring and developing the graduate programs. His enthusiasm for introducing new courses was contagious, and his careful design of their content provided students with constant intellectual stimulation. Equally important was Lauro Campos' contribution through his critical examination of neoclassical assumptions embedded in many of the courses. Although Edmar and Lauro often disagreed, this intellectual dissonance enriched healthy debates about the structure and substance of the curriculum. Lauro often disagreed with this intellectual dissonance enriched healthy debates about the structure and substance of the curriculum. Charles Miller and Flávio Versiani also played significant roles in shaping the new programs. Both were enthusiastic about the initiative, although somewhat cautious regarding my participation and the possible influence I might have, particularly over the macroeconomics curriculum. My appointment to the department became possible thanks to the support of Edmar Bacha, Flávio Versiani, and Charles Miller, for which I remain deeply grateful. At the time, my macroeconomics course was innovative because it returned to Keynesian foundations. It was especially well received by my most talented students. Nevertheless, the course also generated disagreements among some faculty members who opposed the new approach to macroeconomics. In the end, however, the program was approved. These were the elements that defined the period during which UNB departments of economics flourished, a time when enthusiasm for innovation inspired both students and professors. It's only natural that after such creative period, institutions gradually move toward a certain equilibrium. Courses begin to repeat themselves, losing some of the originality and the excitement and that once we characterize them. Research, although still valuable, increasingly reflects the inertia of the system. Self-criticism gradually fades and established patterns begin to reproduce themselves. The intellectual framework that once represented innovation slowly ages, eventually threatening the vitality of the institution itself. Continuous renewal and the spirit of self-examination are therefore essential. The university has begun to show signs of crisis. Several issues are particularly significant. Low faculty salaries, insufficient financial incentives, including scholarships, funding for conferences and research support, difficulty retaining outstanding students who are often attracted by immediate professional opportunities, high rates of delayed graduation, the need to expand the unpacked admissions cutoff from approximately 250 to 400 candidates in the national ranking, a growing perception among students that all degrees are equivalent, regardless of the quality of education, insufficient incentives for faculty research. It is evident that the higher education system is facing a serious crisis. We cannot stand by and watch higher education deteriorate themselves before our eyes. It's essential. It's essential to rethink the structure of higher education. We cannot allow education to become a secondary concern in an era defined by the rapid expansion of knowledge. At the same time, it is important to recognize the university's growth despite these challenges. Yet the vision of a university driven by vibrant, ongoing research seems increasingly distant. Where has the human dimension of economics gone? We must return to the foundations laid by scholars such as John Maynard Keynes, Paul Samuelson, and Ken Arrow, among others. I hope the university can recover its vitality and that both our students and professors will once again be able to inspire and captivate future generations. And then from time to time, new students emerge, such as Leonardo Burstein and João Gabriel, bringing with them the same enthusiasm as dedication to study and research that once defined an entire generation. I deeply thank this homage that recognizes the time dedicated to this university and to the economics. Thanks to the students, colleagues, partners this long way. Thanks to Joca and João Gabriel, the organizers of this event, and also the authors of these nice papers that will be collected in the book. Thanks to all. Tem certeza que eu falei 3 páginas?
Now, I would invite our keynote speaker, Professor Marcelle Chauvet. I hope I spelled it right. And she's a professor at the University of California, Riverside. And I think it's better she talks about herself and she's like her experience with Professor Joaquim Andrade. Please, the floor is yours and also my seat.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcelle Chauvet, and I was born here in Brasilia. I grew up here, and I went to the University of Brasilia. And Professor Joaquim was my professor. So it's a great pleasure to be here, to be invited for this conference. The invitation is especially meaningful because it comes from my hometown friends. Some of them I know since they were a child, like Joca. He lived like 100 yards from me. And some of you I know since I was also at the undergraduate program at the University of Brasilia. I was a teenager, and it was very important to me how I was welcome and supported at the university, and our shared experiences have formed my career, academic career that I have now. So when my base is my root, so are all of you who have been part of it. So, but most important, let me just say that after I graduated from the University of Brasilia, I got my master's degree at the University of Brasilia. Then I went to the University of Pennsylvania and I got my PhD there. And I really tried to come back, but I couldn't for personal reasons. But I still want to come back. One day I'll be back. But I am a professor at the University of California, Riverside, since I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. So, let me see what I was here. Yeah, but the most important part is that it's a privilege for me to recognize Professor Joaquim Andrade, one of the leading figures in the Brazilian economic profession. As a professor, he has devoted over 5 decades at the University of Brasilia. Since he joined the faculty in 1977, he has played a central role in the development of economics, teaching, and research at UNB. Many have gone, he has stayed. I've seen just a few stay, so he has a really important role. So he helped educate generations of economists, as you saw, while contributing to the growth of one of the Brazil's premier graduate program in economics. Some of them, Adriana was almost my classmate. Thank you, 1 year younger than me. Professor Joaquim earned his undergraduate degree in economics from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in 1967 before pursuing graduate studies at Harvard University, where he completed both the master's degree and the PhD in economics in 1981. His doctoral research reflected his long-standing interest in macroeconomic questions and laid the foundation for influential academic career. Throughout his career, his research has focused on macroeconomics, monetary policy, macroeconomic coordination, macroeconomic shocks, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models, and regional economic integration, particularly Mercosur. Beyond his scholarly publication, Professor Joaquim has been a dedicated teacher of undergraduate and graduate courses in macroeconomic, monetary economics, Brazilian economic policy, and advanced macroeconomics, influencing countless students who later became academics, including me, policymakers and leaders in the public and private sectors. For me, this tribute is also deeply personal. When I was an undergraduate student, Professor Joaquim was one of the professors who inspired me to pursue graduate studies. His example came as a formative stage of my career and helped me form the path that eventually led me into academic research and university life. Like many of the former students, I remain grateful not only for what he taught in the classroom, but also for the motivation he instilled in young economists like me and a lot of us here. Professor Joaquim Andrade legacy goes far beyond his academic publication. Is a reflect in the many generations of students he has mentored, the colleagues he has collaborated with, and his lasting influence in the Brazilian economics. His unwavering commitment to academic excellence, intellectual rigor, and public service has established him as a foundational figure in the Department of Economics at the University of Brasilia. It's a great honor to recognize his distinguished career, scholarly contribution, and enduring impact of economics in Brazil. And thank you, Joaquim. Okay, so now I will present my paper, which is inspired on Joaquim as well. Okay, so this paper is ongoing, it's still preliminary, but I have some results. So the title is, let me wait for the, okay, Domestic Vulnerability, Global Shocks, and Macroeconomic Disequilibrium in Brazil. So it's written specially for this conference. Okay, so the roadmap is I'm going to introduce, talk about the motivation, goal of the paper, explain what the paper is about, some of the literature, the main contribution, the data, methods, results, and conclude. So the motivation is like Brazil experiences a lot of internal imbalances and it's also exposed to domestic and global shocks. But being exposed doesn't mean that necessarily that's going to cause an impact. So sometimes the impact can be strong, sometimes weak, sometimes not at all. So internal or external disturbance can produce the mild slowdowns of deep recessions in Brazil. So the idea, when you look at some papers, is that external shocks affect emerging markets. And here I show you that this is not really the case. It has to be the interaction between external, internal triggers and domestic vulnerability. So disequilibrium is what causes the impact and transmission. So the main question that the paper asks is, do domestic global shocks generate different Brazilian responses and outcome? So this is the first question. I had to change the question given the results that I got. So my question now is, do domestic and global shocks generate Brazilian response, and Brazilian response, how it interacts with the domestic shocks, and what is the outcome of that? So it's not just one thing affect the other, everything kind of dynamically interact with each other. So the goal is to study the macroeconomic effect of internal and external shocks depending on the level and composition of domestic disequilibrium before the shocks hit. So we're looking at accumulated macroeconomic imbalances and trying to look at what will be the origin, severity, and duration of business cycle downturns in Brazil. So separating out when it started adjustment from what amplified adjustment. So recession in Brazil can arise from different mechanisms, and that here is when I expanded. So it could be generated by domestically generated contractions, and here I am going to highlight the power of politics. Like in the United States, you could have crazy presidents and still the economy can function because institutions are strong enough and the economy is strong enough. But in Brazil, policymakers have the power to cause recessions and to get the economy out of recession much quicker. So this is one of them, and you're going to see the examples. Other are external shocks that amplify pre-existing vulnerabilities in Brazilian economy, but also pre-existing vulnerability amplified by external shocks. So one affecting the other. And other times we have a rare economic event like COVID pandemic. So basically here, the idea is that we're going to have everything interact with each other, but adjusting in a nonlinear fashion. So we're going to have a fragile domestic state, a global and domestic shock hitting the economy, and how they interact and how they adjust. So economic fragility can build while conventional activity indicators still look positive. So you look at the economy, I might look at employment, industrial production, sales, and might look that the economy is strong. But we are not looking at the external imbalances that might be underlying these variables that can are building up to cause a recession, contraction, or some crisis. So the idea is to try to find that. Like on the surface, everything seems okay, but deeper, there will be imbalances that might be coming up that can cause a major recession later on. And we want to look at commodity price, U.S. Interest rate, exchange rates, interest rates, capital flow, global risk, oil prices hitting Brazil from outside. So there, literature, the three strands here, I'm summarizing a lot of papers that are not built here because, I mean, this is still a work in progress and I'm changing some of the goals as I find the results, but these are some of the main ones. I put here the nonlinear business cycle because this is the framework that I'm used to study it. So these are some of my papers. This 1998 was actually my PhD dissertation that got published. And the 2000 paper is what I applied to Brazil. So it's a paper about business cycles in Brazil. And then we have the macro financial channel, the vulnerability and downside risk. So basically looking at credit, leverage, reserves, and financial conditions, how it predict crisis and growth at risk. So this is going to be like the domestic part. And then we have the external part, like global financial cycles and external shocks, how variables such as exchange rate, capital flow, risk, stocks, oil prices transmit strongly to emerging markets. So this is like the favorite kind of research that people who don't live in Brazil like to do. They like to put emerging markets all in the same bucket and then say that the shocks affect them equally. So we're going to see that that's not really the case. Brazil has its own recessions. And there's a lot of Brazilian evidence. This is just some of them, looking at how Brazil is exposed to exchange rates, local credit after global financial shocks, and also like how commodity super cycles and regional employment production affect Brazil. So the gap in the literature is that most studies emphasize one channel, one shock, or look at cross-country crises. They do not separate current activity from latent vulnerability or ask why and how similar shocks can produce different Brazilian cycles. So that gap is not the existing of shocks, this has been studied, but the state-dependent amplification, and that's the goal of the paper. So we first try to separate out how it starts and how it adjusts and how it amplified. So basically we have these three connections. We have the business cycles of nonlinear regimes. We have external shocks that come from outside, and we have internal shocks. And these internal shocks are many times created by policymakers, as I was saying, policy decisions. And we have financial fragility as well from credit cycles, balance sheets, spreads, and leverage as well. And we want the external shocks and state-dependent transmission, looking at how they connect. So the central hypothesis that external shocks have larger and more persistent effects on Brazilian economy disequilibrium is elevated. And the effect of global disturbance depends on both the size of the shock and the state of domestic vulnerability. And I will add also from internal shocks. Sometimes how the government react to external shocks, who have been quite efficient in some recessions and quite inefficient in some other ones. So the method, we use a small scale, nonlinear dynamic bifactor model. I'm not going to go into the details of the model, but just to say that there are two variables that are not observed. One variable is going to capture the business cycles. So economic activity that reflect business cycles, such as employment, mass production, sales. I have some other variables as well for Brazil, but these are the main ones. And, oh yeah, the GDP, monthly GDP. It's a little noisy, so we extract some of the noise out of that. And then we also estimate another factor, the cap vulnerability. And so that this is going to be the main variable that we're going to test for amplification of the shocks. And then we have another one that reflect the global shocks. So we have those factors, and they're going to be interacting with each other. And then after that, we are going to extract them and test how they affect GDP and employment and so on. So here, Y is the Brazilian output, employment, investment, inflation, credit, exchange rates. And on the right-hand side, we have the external shocks and domestic vulnerability, how they interact with each other, and X is the other variables, control variables as well. Okay, so the data are very important because we have to separate out what is the activity from what is vulnerability, from what are external shocks, so we can identify them and see how they affect each other and how they can cause recessions or not. And so for activity, industrial production, employment, real income, it's small, I cannot read, but seem like retail and services and the monthly output. In vulnerability, we have a credit and debt service, fiscal position, inflation expectations, external shocks, and leverage, as much as I can read. And for external shocks, U.S. raised commodity prices, global risk, oil risk, volatility index, and so on, capital flows. And the outcome are output and investment, inflation, credit, and exchange rates in equities. So basically, during the period that I was able to get, some of them I have less data, some of them I have more. So this is not a balanced panel in the sense that some of the data I have since the beginning and some of them come later, but I was able to use everything. So basically we have 10 recessions as we're gonna go over and show how each one of the shocks affected this, each one of these recessions. So we have the early 80s, the debt crisis. We have a crisis created by policymakers. There was the Cruzado Plan, another one that was the Collor Plan. The other was a Mexican peso crisis. Then we have the 1998-99 currency crisis. Excuse me. We have electricity that coincided, electricity rationing that coincided with the global crisis. We have a crisis of confidence because Lula was elected and there was a cause of capital flows and so on, but that was a very short one. And then we have the global crisis in 2008 to 2009. And then we have a Brazilian specific recession in 2014, 2016, and COVID-19. So each one of them are very different, and each one of them have a different sources, as we're going to see. Sorry, I think I put the wrong one. Okay. I think I'm pressing I'm going backward. No, okay. Just a moment. It's jumping. It's not clicking. I think it's not. It's not obeying. It's jumping to different pages. I have it pointed that way. Okay. Point there. This one. Okay. See, I'm trying to go back, it doesn't go back. Yeah, I acho. Okay. Ah. All right. I think it's working out. Okay, so thank you. The three longest and deepest recession in Brazil were in 1981, 1983. We have 9 quarters of recession and accumulated GDP loss of about 8.5%. This was mostly due to internal debt shock, but accumulated with foreign currency exposure. So just illustrating the main ones, and you might think those are the most important, and you see that they are important in terms of affecting GDP, but not necessarily have anything to do with external shock. For example, the 1989-92, it was 11 quarters, a loss of about 7.7%, but it was primarily from hyperinflation and the extreme domestic stabilization program of Plano Collor. Yes, there was a recession in the world in 1990 and 1991, but there was this recession in Brazil started before and ended before that one. So it's not related, although it was intensified by it. And the other one, 2014, 2016, again, mostly done by Brazil itself, is 11 quarters and loss of about 8.2%. It reflects broad domestic fiscal credit policy and investment disequilibrium. So this is one of the most identified by the disequilibrium transmission vulnerability. But it was amplified by commodity and political shocks. So this is the empirical results, running the model, obtaining the factors, one factor measuring vulnerability, one factor measuring business cycles, one factor measuring global shocks. Then what we find, the first recession, 1981, 1983, I'm not going to read everything, but basically we have that time period in the US with a hyperinflation, and Volcker was the chairman of the Fed at that time, increased interest rates at levels that were higher, unprecedented at that time, to double digits. So we did have a global recession, which caused weak exports. We have high oil prices, and there was an interruption in international lending to Brazil and other countries. Brazil had a fiscal weakness, high inflation, and so the external trigger is what interact with extreme domestic and external vulnerability. So here is like a case study for what people think it is a case. Brazil has a external shock, and that it affects Brazil, but when we have vulnerability, it becomes much more. 1987-88 was the Cruzado Plan, so mostly due internally. So it had nothing to do with external shock, although Brazil was constrained externally by the external debt, but it was Brazil itself. The 1989-92, it was the Collor Plan, there was frozen prices, well here. I mean, all these recessions were formative to me because growing up, I was like, why economists cannot stop hyperinflation? And that's why I became an economist. Before I could do anything, they solved the problem. So I started doing research instead. I was going to come back to Brazil. That was my goal, to try to stop hyperinflation as a dreamer when I was 16 years old. And I got to the University of Brasilia. But anyway, so those recessions are important for me because they were what made me want to be an economist. These plans, one after other, that Brazil had at that time. And hold on. Then we had some other ones for example, the 1995 one is very short. It was caused a Mexican peso crisis. There was a capital flow, and that had a contagion effect. And it was right after Brazil had started the Rio plan, stabilize prices a little, and Brazil responded by increasing interest rates very high, and imposed credit restrictions and tighter monetary policy. So it was the reaction to the Brazil economic policy to the shock that caused a contractionary episode. And it was a quick one. The other one was Asian and Russian financial contagion. So there was the Asian crisis in 1997, July, and that spread to Russian crisis. And then Brazil at that time had a fixed exchange rate. So it was vulnerable to attacks. And the emerging markets, they were speculative investors, they were attacking the Asian currency that had fixed exchange rate. They did to Russia. They all let it flow. But before they did, they lost a lot of reserves. And when that happened in Brazil, Brazil let it flow right away. So the actions of the Brazilian policymakers made the recession was a little longer, but it wasn't very deep. And then 2001, it was a quick one again. It started as due to electricity rationing. I remember I was working at the Central Bank of Brazil at that time, building lead indicators of inflation and the economy. And like, how can we predict that? All of a sudden, electricity price went to the roof. There was no electricity. There's no model that can predict that. So the central bank threw away the models and they just sat down and tried to find out what to do with interest rate at that time. So it was a domestic shock, but at the same time, there was a recession going on in the world that started in March 2001. And so that interaction also caused a deepening of the recession. In 2003, there was a quick recession. There was a crisis of confidence, due mostly because of the presidential election. So there was the uncertainty of the election caused capital flows, strong currency depreciation, and an inflation surge. But as soon as the government entered and continued and showed stability, the recession went away. So this was extremely domestic stabilization with no external influence. And then 2008 was the final, the main global crisis, financial crisis that started with the Lehman collapse in September and spread all over the world. But interesting, the US had a deep recession, but Brazil did not. The response of Brazil to this crisis led it to a relatively milder recession compared to the rest of the world. So here just is an illustration of how the interaction of vulnerability or not can, amortize external shocks or can make them stronger and so on. And the last one that we had, the last one that was not caused by an extreme event like COVID, the last one is the 2014-2016. This is a case study example of imbalances. There are a lot of imbalances in the economy. There is fiscal deterioration, subsidized credit distortions, banking positions, households and corporate debt, price administrative corrections, high inflation, and then monetary tightening to fix it, policy uncertainty. You have the Petrobras Lava Jato conflict and an investment collapse. Investment went down to levels the lowest ever and stayed lower for the longest time. That became a puzzle that we were trying to study at CODACE, the Brazilian Business Cycle Dating Committee. But basically, this was predominantly domestic. And what aggravated was that supply side of commodity prices increase and oil price increase that made it amplified. And the last one was COVID. That was created simultaneously a lot of differences in health, mobility, labor supply, global demand. It induced a lot of technology for like right now we are doing this hybrid. Before COVID, we would do that with Skype and we would be flickering and, we would not be able to be doing that if we still had that technology. With COVID, the technology developed quickly in terms of communication. But what is interesting is that while the US had a major decrease and a major increase, but a slower recovery of inflation and prices, but the economy increased in some sectors a lot, and some sectors were completely affected. So when you look at the total economy in the US, it looks that it was robust, but it was not. There was some recession going on in some sectors. But Brazil did very, very well. The combination of policies made the recession very mild in Brazil and quick. And the growth after that is stronger and low inflation. So basically, these are all conclusions that we got from the analysis of the factors, vulnerability factors, external shocks factors, internal shocks, and how they interact. So in summary, what we find is that we have domestic recessions in Brazil, and that this is something that I don't like it, I dislike it, but at the same time, that's the best they can do. When people from outside Brazil do research and try to put all emerging markets together, they miss a lot of this richness in how Brazil reacts and how some of our recessions are our own that we made ourselves, and that the papers just miss all this richness in. And this is important because as we move forward, we can use this framework to see, how sensitive Brazil would be to external shock, or how vulnerable Brazil is right now in building up for a new recession. So these are things that are more interesting than just see global shocks affect the emerging markets. But this is the richness that I like in this paper. So some of the oral research are predominantly domestic, as I mentioned. Those are the ones that I mentioned before, 1997, 98, 89, 92, 2014, 2016. Then we have some other that predominantly external, 2008, 2009, and Brazil did well in recovering from that, and the 2020 as well. And while we see more interaction between external triggers and domestic vulnerability, some of those here, 91, 83, 95, 98, 99, 2001, 2003. So this is the strongest example of the paper central mechanism. External shocks are important, but the consequences depend on the foreign currency debt, exchange rate, fiscal credibility, and so on. Now, what I found interesting historic comparisons is the 98, 99 versus the 2008, 2009. So the 98, 99 was caused by the Asian financial crisis. There was a speculative attack on the fixed exchange rate. In 1990, it was Russian too, they were attacked. And the speculator came to Brazil that had fixed exchange rate as well. We were affected by it, not nearly as much as Asian countries, but compared to 2008, 2009, Brazil did a lot better in 2008, 2009 and 98, 99. So again, looking at the vulnerability measurement, Brazil was more vulnerable in 98, 99 due to the exchange rate being fixed and so on than 2008, 2009. And the other one is the 2014, 2016 versus 2020. So the first had a very large correction and was mostly domestic, the disequilibrium. The second was extraordinarily exogenous shock. So that just shows that we cannot put all the balls in one package and say, okay, all recessions are the same, or they're all caused by external shocks. So I started with the initial hypothesis that external shocks trigger domestic imbalance amplified. So along the way with the findings, I changed the hypothesis. I think this hypothesis is too limited. Instead, we look at internal or external shocks trigger, and domestic imbalances, external or internal shocks amplify. So everything can be moving together. So the macroeconomic effect is a function of the three variables and the interrelation between them. Some of them are going to be more important than others, as we saw in the case-by-case study. So that's it. If I didn't have time, I was going to show something that happened with COVID in the US, the sectoral recessions that they have there, but I don't have time. So I was just say thank you. Any question?
João? Oh, okay. I have a question.
You always do.
Now, Marcelo, what for me is interesting in your paper is the following. You can control some episodes with the reduction of the vulnerability of Brazilian policies through two different policies. The first was the elimination of the hyperinflation. So the inflationary risk went away with the real plan, right? So this reduced a lot the internal vulnerability of Brazil because of monetary policies is no longer the main cause of the fragility of Brazilian economy. And I think that during what's the name of the vampire that was the president?
Temer.
Temer.
Michel Temer.
Yeah. During Michel Temer tenure, I think that they did something with regards to the fiscal policy. They did some policy change so as to keep the fiscal imbalances of the government under some tight control. So this, I believe, also reduces the vulnerability, another source of vulnerability, which is the fiscal policy, right? So this is exactly my question. Can you use these two policies so as to calculate how much, what was the impact in reducing the vulnerability of the Brazilian economy?
Yeah, those are some of the variables that get into the factor, vulnerability factor. And what you said the first question that you asked
is when they eliminated the hyperinflation risk with the real plan?
Yeah, so there are two things. The vulnerability index is something that's for Brazil and over time. Then we can study how the vulnerability index change due to hyperinflation or no or moderate inflation or external debt or internal debt or data that's very much linked to dollar and so on. But the index is build independent on that. So building the index changes over time. Yes, hyperinflation goes down, but then we have exchange rate risk. So other things are part of it. And then the index goes up and down, independent on only one factor, on only one variable. All the variables have to be moving together. It's like a coincident indicator of vulnerability. Extract the correlation across the variables. So if one not as important, the other ones might be. And then you have that indicator. It changes over time. It could be the index, vulnerability index. But that's why it's important to have a time series of that. Yeah, so that was the first question. The second is, we used that. It's not the case that the vulnerability index has decreased. There were times the index increased quite a bit, like 2014, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16. There were a lot of problems with the debt. The debt was to the roof. And then you have the credit subsidies. You have a lot of risks, internal risks going on due to some of the economic policy. And so those imbalances explain that recession, or this mostly sole cause of that recession. There was no recession anywhere else in the world. It was just Brazil. So that, yeah, the index did not decrease over there. But what I can say that happened, but that is not in the index, is that policy has been very efficient in some of a policy response. Have been quite efficient after the COVID and after the global recession, which are the last two ones. So we have to give that. Any other questions?
I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. Why did you use a non-linear approach instead of a linear approach in the model?
Because I'm looking at phases of the business cycles. I'm not looking like what's happening over time. I'm looking what's happening across expansions and across recessions. So I'm trying to capture phases of the business cycles. Yeah, if you try to look over time, maybe the effects of expansion might be mitigated, and during expansion, nothing's happening. So well, the idea is to look at how external shocks affect the Brazilian economy when the Brazilian economy is vulnerable. When there is no external shock, normally when there is the external shock, there is an external shock that's affecting the whole world, right? And then we have recessions in other countries. So normally you don't have that during Brazilian expansions. So you would mitigate the effect. So we want to look at recessions and expansions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Again, this is a preliminary results, okay? This is ongoing. I'm writing this paper for this conference. So I did as much as I could.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. João, please take control.
So, anyone else would like to make a question to Professor or to Professor Marcelo Chauvet? No? I would like to thank you all for coming to this honor to the Emérito Professor Joaquim Andrade. And I would also like to thank to his family. Most of them are here, and I think I saw some of his family online via YouTube. So I would like to thank them too. I know that most part of his family lives abroad, so I would like to thank them. And tomorrow we start at 9:30 a.m. We will have some paper presentations on this workshop. I think 3 sections, and also my paper. I I would have to present today, but I didn't have time, so sorry. Sorry, Joca, don't get into me. And so that's it. I would like to ask you to we do have coffee, water, and some things to eat here. Unfortunately, Joca would not have time to eat us, but we do have a lot of food here. And thank you very much. It's the end of our workshop today, our first day.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, guys. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye. Big